if you are so comfortable. So just getting right into things, all these strategies that you're going to get tonight are strategies that I've tried over the years as a principal of a middle school, as assistant principal of a lower school therapist. I'm a counselor of a high school now, and as a mom. So I just want to plant us though in the time we're in. We're in everything with COVID. We're obviously in a different situation than we've ever been in before, but we do find that our students, teachers, and parents are having some overlapping experiences so they can actually relate to each other. And I'll just unpack them a little bit. We're all in situations that we've never been in before. So this is new for everyone, and it's being redefined on a daily basis. And so one thing that I'm going to encourage you to do as you listen tonight, because you're going to hear me say it several times in different ways, to check in with yourself and how you're doing, because the biggest factor in being able to have a meaningful conversation with kids in uncertain times is how you're doing. So checking with yourself. The other thing is that families were not built to spend the kind of time that we're spending together. It's unprecedented that we have had this much time together, even if people are going to school or going to work part-time or whatever. We're spending an incredible amount of time together, which can be great things, but it can also mean that there's some boundaries that are being pushed. So the other part, the flip side of this, is that we are away from people that we are typically with. So we flipped the way we're spending our time in our relationships, and kids are definitely talking about what that feels like. And I know one student said to me the other day, he was like, it's nice, I get a home cooked lunch every day. And he's like, but every day my mom asks me questions during lunch. And I was like, yeah, because that's something she's used to doing when she sees you, is asking you questions, and you're not used to seeing her at lunch. So even figuring out things like that has taken on new meaning. Because we're in a situation we've never been in before, we're unable to draw on previous experiences to ask family members or other parents for advice. So we're all figuring this out together, which can add to discomfort, but it also can make it so that we can think about ourselves as being in an era of co-construction, that we're working together with our children and grandchildren, or any of the children that you love, to figure out what the relationship's going to be like. Another piece of the time that we're in is that many of us are exposed in ways that we never expected to be. We are in each other's homes without invitation, and we're in each other's homes without narrative around it, without rules around it. You're seeing into my office right now. Up until 7 months ago, no one except my family had ever seen my office. And so we're also getting a view into people's lives. We're seeing, maybe the relationships they're in, or some symbols of their belief systems, and other, maybe statements and visuals around that tell us something about their socioeconomic status. So we have to be really mindful of that. And we are also very exposed. So small things you can do. I did this the other day with a group of second graders. They just got big pieces of paper, and I had them color on their papers. They were all remote. They colored on their papers, and they made their own backdrop. And so then we just taped them up on the walls, so they had their own backdrop. As an adult, you might want to do something a little different, but I have found that kids are really seeking that visual privacy, even if it's not complete privacy. I know a bunch of kids who said that last spring, having any kind of barrier made them feel like they were a little bit more on their own, especially for kids who share rooms with other people. They need some space, even if it's, a 1 foot space. It doesn't have to be a room. It just needs to be a little space that they can claim as their own. And then I also want to encourage us to consider the reliability of the narration that people are putting forward in their lives. If you're on social media, you've probably had the experience of seeing everyone kind of living their best lives on social media and posting all these great things. And isn't this great? My family's doing this, and here's the bread I baked, and all of these things. And I just encourage you to remember that before COVID, things were exactly the same, where people were posting things in their lives that weren't really representative of their whole lives. So I think of it like those are snapshots in their lives, but they're not the movie of their lives. And we have found that quite a few people are internalizing the narrative that they're seeing. So they might be thinking, wow, I can barely make dinner some days, and all my friends are having these amazing dinners and they're cooking with their children and it's so great. And they're really internalizing it. So many of us who are in the clinical field are encouraging everyone to remember that those are snapshots taken at moments in their lives. They're not the movie of their lives. And similarly for you, you don't have to post all about your life in any way, but also be thinking about, what do you want to know from this time? I know a mom who told me that what she's been doing with her Facebook is she's been posting pictures so they come up on her memory line later. And they're just things like about what life is like then, the masks and stuff like that. Not the big, we had this great night. If you had a great night, that's fantastic. But please know that a lot of the feeds that we see are not reliable narration of somebody's lives. So when you see me look down, it's because I have a double screen, so I'm checking. And I should also warn you that there's a bumblebee in my office, and I'm really afraid he's going to land at some point while I'm talking. I think he just will decide to land while I'm talking. So if you see me get up and jump, that's why. I'm transparent facilitation. I just put it all out there. All right, so now let's think about what are some of the things that we're most needing right now, and how can we support our kids and ourselves in having meaningful conversations? Well, we know from linguists that most of us listen to respond. So we miss those middle two pieces, and those middle two pieces are where the emotion are attached. So want to be thinking about that. So what do I mean by the difference between listening and hearing? Listening is being able to gather the story, almost being able to repeat it back to someone. You may have seen information on responsive listening, and so that's because we're trying to listen to get the information, and we say it back almost the same way to show that we have absorbed the words. Hearing is different. Hearing is when you can take the words in. You could synthesize them. You could maybe even make them into fewer sentences. You could maybe even restate them in a different way. And so that's different. So listening is more like saying the facts. Hearing is really showing that you're absorbing what was shared with you. And then third is acknowledging, and between acknowledging and hearing, between those two is also where empathy comes in, and really focusing on making sure that we're able to empathize with somebody. Empathy is different than, trying to fully understand somebody else's experience, because we never can. We could never understand fully the experience of someone else, but you could imagine how you might feel. And it softens our hearts when we have that moment. Acknowledging also includes being able to say, this is what I heard you say, and this is how I'm reacting to it. It might be where you say, I need to think about it for a few minutes. Some other piece, it's like the transition, and then responding. And responding is where we will say, we might say we need to think about it longer. We might say, I'd like us to talk about this tomorrow. We might say, you're absolutely right. I was wrong, and here's what we need to do. But that's where we respond. So one thing for everybody, these are human skills, and particularly for kids, where they're trying everything out for size, and they're discovering what it is that they believe and how to share what it is that's on their minds. We need to resist that desire to go from listening to responding. You can also check your body language when we're ready to when we're talking, when we're listening to somebody talk and we're ready to respond. We often look like we're ready to respond. We may catch our breath. We may move our body forward, something like that shows that we're ready. And it happens very quickly after somebody starts talking. So really making sure when you're listening, just focusing on what are the words that I'm hearing. And then when I'm hearing, how do I absorb those words? What do they mean to me? And then acknowledging it and then responding. All right, so I also want us to be thinking about, I'm going to do this one and one more, and then we'll come back together in case anyone has questions. we need to, our kids are growing and developing really quickly, and one of the challenges that happens is adults often treat them as this, as if they are the age of the size that they look. So what I mean by that is, let's say I had a fifth grade girl who came back to school this year, and she had grown 4 inches over the summer. She's still the same goofy silly girl that she was when she left school, but she looks like a middle schooler. And so we're trying to help that everyone remember that she's still a very young girl. She's actually really young for the grade. So just as a visual, as an example, this is one of my children. This was the week before he started middle school, and our middle school is 3 years. So the week before sixth grade. And this is the month after he finished middle school. And so what I have to remember in those, when I think of this with my students and with my own children, is that though this person, the person on the right, looks like they're the ones that are listening and they are the one I'm talking to, I have to remember that especially for kids from the middle of upper elementary school, so third grade on through middle of high school, 10th grade, where they're growing and changing so much, I have to remember that most of the time, this is the person who's listening to me, which means I need to have more empathy for him. So thinking about those kinds of things. And I know a dad where he keeps pictures of his kids, a baby picture of his kids on the refrigerator to remind him all the time that that part of their child is still in there. And I have one more, and then we're going to come back and see what you're thinking. So that one of the things that we can really consider when we're thinking about having meaningful conversations with our children is that we're planting seeds. So this means that frequently what we talk to them about may not show in their language or in their actions for years to come, or even months or years to come. So we want to think about how we're modeling for them all the time. If we're walking around stressed, visibly stressed, most kids will absorb that in uncertain times, being stressed is the reaction. So and that doesn't mean you can't be stressed. I mean, it's a human response, but you could pair it with language such as, this is a really stressful time. I need to make sure that I'm going to take myself for a walk tomorrow, or some form of self-care for myself so that I can not be so stressed. So just saying that is that kind of modeling. And I think of that as kind of talking around kids, like sprinkling around kids. Things like if you're listening to a podcast or reading an article or something along those lines, you might just say out into the kitchen, I heard this on the news, and it just made me feel whatever feeling you're having. Doesn't mean you're having a conversation, but you're sending a message to that child that that's how you're feeling, and you're able to absorb it in a different way. Two other pieces that are really key in this is having your kids know your values. And I keep using the term your kids. I'm just referring to any child that you love and spend time with. Have them know your values, ensure they know your values. So most families are the group of people who care about each other. Most families have very few values. They have, 5 or 6 is kind of typical, but everything else comes around that. So the habits come from the values. For example, watching a movie on a Friday night as a family is a habit. Spending time together intentionally as a family is the value. And we know from research that a lot of times parents think kids know the values, but the kids don't know. So having those conversations, this time actually provides us some opportunities to do so. And then lastly, I've been a counselor for a really long time, and I've never heard a child say that they really appreciate when an adult says, well, when I was your age, in response to something they're sharing. But we can use the when I was your age in a way that is really intentional. So we know, leaning into my diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work, we know that kids today have far more exposure to language around systemic racism, around gender identity, the gender we feel that we are most authentically ourselves, around politics. our current 10th graders will not remember a time before there was a Black president. So they have a whole different memory system than we do. And so one of the ways we can use talking about our age well is to say, you know, I didn't talk about this when I was your age. So I'm learning and I'm growing and I'm going to make some mistakes, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So that means that we're going to learn this together. And so in that way, you're putting them in a place where they can co-construct with you. They can share their ideas with you, and you're learning together. And that means you can grow together, and you can also test things out with each other and see how it feels. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and see how we're doing, see if we have any questions. I see somebody in the waiting room, and then we'll come back and we'll do some more. All right. What are we thinking? This is the part where it's always like, who's going to go first?
Hey, Jan, how are you?
Bobby, I'm great. I can't even see you yet, but I'm glad to hear your voice.
I'm here. I just wanted to say hi to everybody and tell you that we always appreciate the expertise you share with our community. One thing that you said that, you know, I've been thinking a lot about also, given some of the issues that we're talking about and having these conversations. And as you said, with not just our own children, but kids across our lives that we love and care about, is also acknowledging and knowing that, particularly for children of color as well, as you were talking about that perception of how they are perceived to often be older or more mature than they are, that, you know, with children of color, studies show that people think them to be on average at least 4 years older than they often are, and all the good, bad, and indifferent that comes along with that.
Yes, thank you for expanding on that. And that's particularly, I mean, we see that falls on gender lines. We also see that, you know, there's over discipline. There's a lot of other factors that go into it. And we definitely do have these moments when we see kids as older than they are, and always have to be mindful of how that plays out differently by race and by gender. And also by body size and shape. So people who have female bodies that develop early are often thought to be much older than they are, and there's a lot of negative associations that can go with that. And so there's many pieces to that. So really seeing kids where they are is what's important. Other thoughts?
Jen, in terms of families, what would you suggest in terms of time individually with your children and collectively as a family? What kind of balance do you think is healthy?
So that's a hard one, because I'm telling you, I'm dropping something in the chat. It's just an EPUB from the conversation today. The challenge here is that it's not a universal. And so if, for example, the family value is we need to spend time together, then that's the value and that's going to be what's going to happen. But it would be helpful if each family member got to decide what worked for them. I know some kids who have said to me, I don't need to have conversations with my parents or my grandparents or whoever's taking care of me all the time. I just need to be near them. And so one family, they decided that they were going to cook together. So they were physically near each other. And the adult in that space had to remind herself regularly not to continue to talk all the time and take up verbal space. But one thing we can do is really help kids to think about what they need, setting the boundary of that we need time to connect. That's an important part. If that's one of your values in your home, so you're setting that boundary, but then kids get to decide. I'll tell you, in my family, I have one kid who's much more talkative than the other, and the one that's not as talkative, the way we connected when he was little was we had a book club. He picked a book one month, I picked a book one month, we'd read it, and then we would just have some tea or something and talk about the book. So really trying to think about where they are in that moment.
And I think some children can be more comfortable with silence than other children. So
Absolutely.
It's always kind of figuring out that balance as well.
Yeah, some adults too. I know a student of mine, because I'm a counselor in a high school, and he went on a college trip with his dad, and it was quiet the whole time. And he came back saying, that was the best trip with my dad. We just listened to music. And the dad was like, I thought we were going to bond. And it was very much that they had very different ideas. Well, they also didn't talk about it. And that's why I was saying it's important to talk about those things. But they have very different ideas of what bonding looked like in their family. or for each of them. All right, I'm going to give us some more strategies. I did put that EPUB in the folder, and also I just put out today or yesterday, if the days are blending together, yesterday, an EPUB on supporting conversations around the election. It's written more for teachers, but there's a lot of resources for parents that you are welcome to have. If you want, I can drop it in the chat, or you can just find it on my website and, you know, look
It was
up.
yesterday.
It was yesterday. Thank you, Bobby. I've taught in 4 time zones in the last day and a half. So, okay. So now I was asked around January of last year by a lot of schools to help them think about how to have conversations around the election. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the election, but that's not all what this is about. And the reason was after the 2016 election, schools really found that they struggled, and so did a lot of parents. And because I have the privilege of working with so many kids in really different schools in many countries and many parts of this country, I asked kids of all different spaces what they were feeling after the election. And one thing that was really interesting to me, they used different words, but they were the words that are often code for being afraid. And what the fear mostly had to do with was adults being in near psychological fetal positions, or adults being gleeful when others were in pain, or adults being apathetic when others are having a hard time. And so really thinking about that was one piece that was kind of leading me off this year, and thinking about skills around the election. Well, then COVID hit, and schools were asking for me to come help them talk about COVID. And then the visible systemic racism of this summer, because there's nothing new, it's just become more visible. It's been visible, but it's more visible with videotapes and film. People are asking how to have those conversations, and I started feeling like I was feeling overwhelmed, because you can't have so many different sets of skills. And so I distilled my thinking down to the strategies that I use most often in challenging situations. And so I'll just give you those here. The first is to ask at the beginning. This can work in several different ways. And again, this is all written up in your EPUB. At the beginning, if you have multiple children and there's a challenge between them, you could ask at the beginning what happened. And in that case, you would want to ask them to describe it almost as if they were looking at it through their camera with no sound. But they could also describe what they heard with no visual. So that gets at 2 parts of the brain and helps them to think things through differently. It can also give you a little bit more information. You could also, if they're having a hard time, you can ask at the beginning what was going on. Now, sometimes kids don't show their emotions for quite a while. And we see this certainly around social injustice, particularly around race and sexism and others, where kids often hold those in. And sometimes they're not even aware of the impact they've had on them. Adults do this too, by the way. But when we ask at the beginning, we might be able to go back to what was going on then, not so that we can go back and try to change history, but so we can understand what was going on at that time, because then it layers on itself. So at the beginning is a great question to start with, and it supports something that's in your EPUB, is sentence stems, having things pieces that you would use at the beginning of a sentence to get more information, or to get yourself out of being the focus of the conversation. So you might ask, I'm wondering, can you tell me more? Or I don't understand, can you tell me what your thinking is? Or can we find the small parts we agree on, and then build out from there? It's also helpful, in one of the sentence stems that's in the EPUB, is to think about a sentence stem that you would use to let a child know that something else is going to come up, so that they are aware of it. I often ask kids and adults, may I stretch that? So I'm letting them know that I want to add to it, but I'm also letting them know that it might feel like a stretch. So that's a great strategy. Another one is developing a script, and the scripts are thinking about the situations or the conversations that you are worried will be challenging, or they already have been challenging, or they didn't go well. And think about, what is your intention in that conversation? What do you want to communicate? And we know there's a big gap for many of us between our intentions, what we're trying to do, and our impact, the way it's experienced by others. So our goal is often to reduce the space in between. And so if we take the situation that we're nervous about or concerned about or challenged by, and we think about, what are my intentions, and think through, what would I say in that moment? What do I want to say? So you're kind of thinking through the words and maybe even practicing them. I practice mine. A script should not be robotic or formulaic, but should represent what you're thinking. So one that I use all the time, that you're welcome to use or not, is I say, that is a really important topic and it requires more time then I am able to give it right now. It deserves more time. And so may I think about it for a little while and come back. Adding the think about it is important because our society is moving so fast and we're so responsive that we need those counter messages, that being thoughtfulness and having discernment is important. Okay, next. This is Bobby and Frankie and Mike, you've heard me say this so many times. Answer in one sentence. When we're uncomfortable, when we're stressed, when we're concerned, we tend to go on and on and on. We fill space with words, or we fill space with silence. And so neither of which are authentic to who we are. So forcing yourself to answer in one sentence, especially when you pair it with what is your script, you can then stop and listen. And then they can talk, and you say one sentence, and you go back and forth until the subject is as far as it can go at that time. You might also have noticed that when I was sharing that, my voice went lower and slower. I know, so it's important to know about yourself what happens to you when you're agitated. I know when I'm anxious or excited or nervous, my voice goes up and my cadence is fast. And so I have to force myself to slow down and go lower. And that sends like a trick to my brain that, we have a strategy, we're okay. The next is to give yourself time. This is the part of discernment. Allow yourself time to think about things. If you say you're going to come back to your child, then you might want to set a time. Or there's another helpful thing. If you have something big to talk to them about, nobody likes somebody just come at them. Open the door and someone's like, blah, just going at them. So instead saying, I have something important I'd like to discuss with you. You might say what the issue is about. Would you like to talk about it before dinner or after dinner? So you're saying we're going to talk about it, but they get choice. As many places as you can give kids choice and agency, the better off they are. So anytime, just make sure I'm going to say time twice, make sure you're giving yourself that space for consideration, but also if you set up in your family that when there's something difficult to talk about, that you will schedule it with each other. You can't always do that, but for a lot of times you can. Another thing to consider is if you have multiple people in your home, where do those conversations happen? One of the things that we set up in our home is that when we were having a corrective conversation with one of our children, we didn't do it in front of the other child. So we went into another room to save them to give them some privacy. And that was something that they liked, and it was something we did. You don't have to go into another another room, but if you have a space, that you could use, please do. Other things along those lines is forcing kids to look at us when we're having a challenging conversation will probably work against us. It comes from that whole idea of looking in the eye means respect, which is actually not the case. It actually means compliance, and it's also often culturally insensitive. What we find is that most people are more comfortable having challenging conversations when they are side by side. So going for a walk together, driving in a car together, anything so they're side by side, but not having to force looking at each other. And then lastly, for my top 5 strategies, although there's a bunch more in your EPUB, is this is a sentence stem. When you think I heard or saw something, but you didn't hear or see me respond, this is a strategy that I work with teachers on all the time, because there's so often that things happen and we don't know it, or that we do know it and we don't know how to deal with it, or we're hoping someone else will deal with it. When we're working with kids in our home, the same thing happens. We might not see that somebody says something to our child or the child we're taking care of and it hurt them. We might miss those cues on their face. Or we might miss that one thing, something that was funny one moment is hurtful the next. So anything along those lines. So if you say this, when you think I heard or saw, but you didn't see me hear or respond, I'm asking you to, and then you fill it in with what works best for you. If you would like them to talk to you about it, if that's their goal, please don't end with that, because sometimes that's really hard to do. So if you say, I really hope you'll talk to me about it, but if you're not comfortable talking to me about it, you could email it to me, you could call your aunt so-and-so, you could, whatever it is, but please ask them to get that information to me. So that way you're putting them in partnership with you to make sure that you know and that you saw. The other reason why I like this strategy is because my youngest students are 3 and my oldest are in college, and these are consent skills. So what we find in students, people who have had sexual assault or something along those lines happen to them, they're often asked, did you tell someone? And many, many times they did, but that person didn't do something about it. We also see it with kids who have had racist statements made to them. They're often asked, why didn't you say anything, or did you say something? And frequently they did, but the person didn't absorb it for the weight that it was. And so when we tell them, I'd like you to tell me, but if you don't feel that you can, or you don't think I'm paying attention, please go tell someone else and tell someone else until the person who needs to know knows. That's supporting them with consent. We don't want to put the whole burden on them. We have to do our own work, but that's something that you might be thinking about. And I'm gonna stop here for a minute and just see, Frankie, if anyone has any questions. I was gonna stop sharing the screen, but I was having a little trouble getting back in, so I'm gonna keep the slides up, but if anyone has any questions, they can just voice them.
There's nothing currently in the chat, so anyone that has a question, please feel free to just voice it.
I have a question. Hi, thank you so much. This is so helpful.
Oh, good.
So I have 2 teenagers, and one of them sometimes has trouble expressing herself. So she, especially when she's in a very emotional state and something's happened, maybe she didn't do well on a test and she wants to talk about it, or maybe she had something difficult happen with a friend. And a lot of times she has trouble just getting the words out. And I really try to give her space and wait and just be patient and show a lot of empathy. But other than that, is there anything I can do? Because often she'll say, I just can't explain it. And she gets impatient.
Yeah, the brain and feelings often have a little bit of a battle. And especially when you said she's a teenager. I think that's what you
said. She's 15.
Okay, so 15. So she's still very much in the throes of adolescence. So she's got hormones and chemicals working on at the same time, and that's a lot. So when she's not upset, I would explore with her some things that she might do that might be helpful. Like, does she like to doodle or draw or journal or sing or listen to certain kinds of music? So thinking about things when she's not upset might be helpful. I'm actually going to do a self-care plan with you that for you all that you could do with her. But I would definitely think about other ways to express her feelings. I know kids who do it through movement, through, like dances or other kinds of movement. I know kids who doodle or draw or paint or sing or anything like that, or just have silence, have some meditative time or some other form of silence. Any of those kinds of things, just thinking through what's one thing that would help you right now, because there's a lot of internal pressure. And though I don't hear you giving her pressure, I imagine she feels some pressure to tell you what's going on. And plus she also probably feels that you can help her. So there's a real challenge there. So removing that pressure would be the first step, and help her think of other strategies for expression. One thing you could do is try with her to find other ways to express when she's feeling good. Besides words. Like if you can't use any words, how would we know that you're feeling really excited about something? And try other emotions to see how she might display those, and then transfer those ways of displaying them to when she's upset. Does that support what you're asking?
It does. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure. All right. I'm going to move us on for a couple more. Well, I'm an educator, so I think of them in terms of blocks. So when everything looks like a nail, then we feel like our only tool is a hammer. Or when we have everything, when all we have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's it. So we need to look for other tools. And so one of the questions that comes up frequently for parents is, when should I be concerned? What should I do if I am concerned? And how else can I develop my skill set? And remember, for a lot of our kids, most of our kids are not in school full time. I don't know anyone else. I have one kid who's in school full time, physically on campus. I don't know anyone else who has. So that means that we don't have the buffer that we used to have, where our kids could have other people, friends, and other adults help them problem solve. So we're really having to think about things differently. This is why it's all the more important that you have a connected relationship. If you are the person who spends time with the children about school, have a connected relationship with the teachers. And there's a webinar that's free that's out, that I'm happy to send you, that I did on nurturing the parent-teacher relationship, that has some strategies for that. And it's just freebie. Actually, you can find it on my website. So thinking about what some of the other tools might be. So, and also how to think about whether or not you should be concerned. So big concerns are obviously if you notice anything different. Our priority as adults in kids' lives is to ensure safety, physical safety, emotional safety, social safety, psychological safety. So that's our priority. We want to look for changes in attitude, changes in sleep and eating patterns, changes in engagement with other people, and changes in the way they're physically carrying themselves. I know this might sound kind of odd, but also changes in hygiene. The more we're spending time at home, that can be looser around personal hygiene. But really looking for any of those changes. If you notice a significant change in pattern with your children that last a week to a week and a half, 2 weeks at the most, I would call the pediatrician, if for no other reason, just to make sure you're checking your gut. And especially if sleep patterns have changed and engagement patterns. And then listening is really, again, the 4 steps. So you're listening to the words, but then you're also hearing and acknowledging and responding. If kids say things like, I'm so depressed, pursue that. That doesn't mean that they're actually clinically depressed. We as a society have been using a lot of words, diagnostic words, for feelings that are not diagnosable. So I had a student say to me that he was so depressed, and I was like, okay, well, let's talk about that. What does that feel like? What does that seem like? And what it was he was sad. And he had been sad for 2 days, and that was appropriate. He and his girlfriend had broken up. It made sense that he was sad. He wasn't depressed. He had not diagnosed himself. So, but on the other hand, if kids are using words like that, I'm feeling so anxious, I'm feeling so stressed, I'm feeling depressed, check in on how that's going. And again, call the pediatrician. If you notice a significant change in your child, I urge parents to call your pediatrician, but also make sure that they are checking hearing and vision, and if possible, blood work. We have a lot of situations where things that are actually physically based are presenting as emotional concerns. I had a student who was diagnosed with having attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and the medication wasn't working at all, wasn't having any impact at all. And when he told me that when he was sent for a full physical, they discovered that what he actually had was a hearing problem. And that kind of thing is not common, but it's also not uncommon. And then check in with how they're doing. Ask, one of my favorite questions that I ask kids all the time, my own and others, is how will we know if you're having a hard time? What will it look like? What will it sound like? How will we know? We don't want to be over analyzing everything. And sometimes they can have a hard time and we don't need to be part of it. So during the course of a day, kids have hard times, and certainly the course of a week, and they are able to move through that. So sometimes we don't need to be part of it, but that's why we would ask, like, what would it look like and sound like if you're having a really hard time? All right, so 2 more blocks, and then I'm gonna stop screen sharing, because then we can just chat. Get the last person in here. All right, so, whoops. Let's think about mistakes. Making mistakes is a really powerful thing. It's an experience we all have. One thing we really want to model for the kids in our lives is that making mistakes is human. And it's not something that makes you doesn't say anything less about your personality. It means you're fallible, which is really part of being human. And kids need to see that when they see adults in their lives only having everything go well or never having a problem, that says to them that they should never have a problem, especially they should never have a problem when they grow up. So we want to model understanding that we've made mistakes. So even just saying like, wow, today I wish I had done this differently. When we are making mistakes with our experience with the children in our lives, it's very important that we practice apologizing. Apologizing adds to our credibility with kids. There's a lot of thought for many years that apologizing kind of undermined you as a parent. And actually, that's not true at all. When kids see adults apologize, it actually strengthens the relationship or adds to the credibility. And if you think about it, we tell them all the time from when they're a really young age that they need to apologize to someone when they've done something wrong. Well, they need to see us do the same, and they need to feel it toward them. We mess up with them, and we need to apologize to them when we do. Also focusing on the impact, again, that intent and impact. So even if your intentions were not to hurt your child, but you did hurt your child, the focus needs to be on how you made them feel, not what you're intending to do. Because when we say this is, you can spend a minute on this is what I was trying to do, but then the rest, if you think of like 1 to 10, 1 and 2 would be what your intentions were, and 3 to 10 were about the impact. When we spend too much time talking about our intentions, it can feel defensive and it can feel like they're not being heard, back to those 4 steps of hearing. And again, modeling, apologizing normalizes that habit and pattern of an apology and just how important that is. And one more piece, this is something you can do at home, and please do it for yourself. And I'll just walk you through it and then explain the rest of them, and you can get these. I'm happy to share this activity with you. So what you would do is have you and your family, again, the family being people that you're with, make a list. And on the list would be first, temperatures, the temperatures that make you feel good, the temperatures outside your body, and also the temperatures of food. So what makes you feel comforted, or drinks? What makes you feel grounded? So you make a list of the temperatures, and then you'd circle those that you have immediate access to, and leave no circle around those that are person, place, or time dependent. So you make a list of the temperatures and you'd spend some time on it. I always liked, when I do something like this, I like to work on it and then leave blank so I can add to it and have my kids add to it. And Leslie, this is the activity that I was talking about that you might want to do with your daughter. Same with foods. What foods make you feel grounded or cared for or good? Sounds, sound and sight are pretty self-explanatory, but I would suggest that you're very creative about the person, place, or time specific, because thanks to technology, we can see things. Like I can see the ocean right now. I could log on and see the ocean. And so being a little creative about that. Textures is the textures we like to wear or the things we like to have on us. I know in my family, one of my children I always know is not feeling well when certain slippers are being worn. Drinks are, you want to think about the drinks themselves, but also the temperature, and that's where you blend those. Now, thoughts we have access to all the time. And by thoughts, some of the things that might be helpful are thinking about daydreams or revisiting memories. I have a student who likes to do puzzles in his head. He likes to visualize a puzzle and think about that. And then physical movements. So you'd work with your family and make this list and then divide it up. The one list would be your menu of resources that you have when you're stressed or uncomfortable. And the other are those things that are person, place, or time specific. And then we know from research that for many of us, if we engage in a self-care strategy when we're upset, we often do 1 or 2 and then we get defeated and we shut down and we stop doing it. But for most of us, we need multiple self-care strategies. And so if you make a nice menu and you just kind of go through the menu until you feel either good or like you can live with the discomfort. The discomfort is manageable. And one strategy along that is if something is a boulder, it's immovable. That's something you can't get around. So you need more self-care, more support, more love, or whatever it is that helps you in that moment. Now, a rock is big and weighty, but you could carry it around, not for too long. It would get exhausting, but you can manage with it for a little while. And a pebble is small and maybe annoying, but we can get through our days with pebbles in our pockets, and we're able to function. So with younger kids too, and actually with middle school kids, I'll ask them, is it a pebble, rock, or boulder? If it's a boulder, everything stops. If it's a rock, we think about what will help us till we get to a point that we're able to navigate that. And if it's a pebble, what will you do about it? And then these are just the resources. This is my podcast that Frankie mentioned. It's all free. It's education for and by educators and for parents. Lots of episodes will appeal to you, and you can go in and see topics. Right now, we're in episode 6 of 7 of conversations around the election, which of course is not really about the election. It's all about civil discourse, but lots of strategies there. And here's how you can follow my work or request resources. I do publish a lot. I write for different places, and I'm always putting stuff out, and I really believe in putting freebies out. So you can follow me on any social media or my website and have access to any of those.